Welcome back to Value Creation Nation, everybody. This is Lane Taylor. Again, not your host, but Scott and Gene cannot get me out of here. And so with that being said, thanks so much for everyone that has listened to the pilot episode and then the first two episodes on inventory management. Over the first two episodes, Gene and Scott challenged us to think differently about inventory management. We discussed why inventory isn't simply a supply chain issue. It's a strategic business asset that impacts everything from working capital and profitability to customer experience and long-term value creation. In the most recent conversation, we took a step further by exploring how organizations can improve inventory performance through stronger processes, better data, cross-functionality collaboration, and even thoughtful use of AI. So if you have not listened to any of those episodes beforehand, head over to Apple, Spotify, and YouTube and make sure to check those out. Now, today, we're going to transition into a little bit of a different thing when it comes to Balanced Scorecard. Now, Scott and Gene are going to have visuals for you to look at. So if you're listening to this, make sure you go over to YouTube and maybe watch the video version of it when you see some of the charts and graphs that they're going to show you. They're going to try their best to walk you through it if you're listening to this on Apple and Spotify. But again, today we're going to be exploring one of the most powerful and often underutilized tools in business, the Balanced Scorecard. And so with that, Gene and Scott, welcome back to Value Creation Nation. Let's dive into the conversation. And I'm just going to start at very high level. And we're going to talk about, what is the Balanced Scorecard? Why was it created? And why should business leaders still be using it today? So with that, gentlemen, let's roll off to the Balanced Scorecard.
So most folks are used to what has historically been put in play, which are key performance indicators. We believe that businesses should go beyond just looking at key performance indicators to creating a balanced scorecard, which looks at the interrelationship of different operational components of the business, how they play together, and how they allow the business to reach their operating vision and the mission of the business. What happens today a lot of times by looking at KPIs in a silo is each silo sub-optimizes the overall performance by optimizing their own key performance indicators. We believe that the business should operate as a single team, a single unit, and by creating a balanced scorecard which looks at the interrelationship of each of the functions to each other, that they then create a better visibility to the business, a better understanding of the performance of the business, and a better way to be able to allow the business to reach its goals. An example of this is we're looking at today, Microsoft announced an Xbox. They're going to let go of 4,800 folks. They cited as the reason for that is their operating margin for the Xbox division is 3 to 10 times below their competitors, and that their expenses are high, their labor costs are high, their productivities aren't as high as they need to be, and so they're looking at ways that they can reduce their expenses to be able to manage their profitability and deliver to the street. We believe that if you had a balanced scorecard that was looking at the productivity of the different aspects of the business and how that was generating either the margin that was needed or the lack thereof, that the business could have proactively made adjustments on the fly rather than resulting in a large layoff like was just announced in the news. Gene, anything you want to add?
Yeah, we should say for those of you who are listening or watching, Balanced Scorecard, we acknowledge has been around. Kaplan and Norton created it back in the 90s in a book, and it got a lot of use in the beginning. It fell off the main charts for several years because, as Scott implied, the dashboards and control centers and everything else were being used to monitor specific actions in the supply chain. However, Balanced Scorecard is enjoying a resurgence now, mainly because of its value-driven rationale. We wanted to give you a good feel for how it's being used today by leading companies to really get at decision support around what can be looked at as value oriented once you get into it. And we'll show you examples of that and really drill into what are the root causes of the performance metrics across functions and how they can be addressed for value.
Can I ask you, gentlemen, from an outsider perspective, and you guys being the experts in this, Balanced Scorecard, you said at the very beginning, KPIs. Why was there a move away in the business ecosystem of the Balanced Scorecard? What would you attest to that?
It takes a harmonization and a collaboration of all aspects of the business. It's difficult to put together. It requires clarity of vision. It requires teams to work together and recognize the interrelationship of the different components. So it's not easy to do. It's easier to put in place silo-based KPIs. That's a whole lot easier to implement. So for example, if you're in transportation, you want the lowest cost per mile delivered or the lowest cost per transportation cost per unit shipped, right? If you're looking at in a warehouse, you're looking at the productivity. So what's the productivity of picking? What's the productivity of shipping? What's the productivity of receiving? So it's a whole lot easier for each of the functions to define their individual areas and what the productivities and what the metrics are that displays their own productivity. But there are times when one function will increase its productivity, having an adverse effect of the next activity down the line. And as you know, we've talked about supply chain being a connected function. Each of the functions, if they're not effectively balanced, then one activity being faster and the next activity being slower does nothing to help speed up the flow of any activity in any process. So the balanced scorecard ensures that the process is load balanced, that the teams are pulling together, and that everybody is focused on the same objective and goals and reaches the same throughput parameter or the same objectives that the business is looking to achieve.
Yeah, and I think last couple of decades, companies have been focusing on the basic processes that make up the supply chain: buy, make, move, sell, and distribute, and trying to optimize their own silos or processes, as Scott said. Lately, though, when people have discovered there's an end-to-end supply chain, as Procter & Gamble calls it, from farm to kitchen. These processes have to all work in some synchronized process. And so what happens is you become more interested in end-to-end metrics, or at least process metrics that cross the functions.
So this is the big thing. Balanced scorecard is the business's way of adding value without using AI or additional new technology. It's the way of aligning functions and activities to ensure it delivers on the strategic requirements of the business, focus of the business, and those differentiating factors that allows them to be unique in the marketplace.
Okay, but you said something very interesting. You said without AI. Why did you say that?
Because AI typically requires analytics and is delivering some new process or new activity. You don't need to implement AI to be able to generate the value that a balanced scorecard will bring to the table. A balanced scorecard is really a way for a business to align on its strategy and ensure that the entire organization is focused on the performance metrics, which will determine its ability to reach its targets and its ability to deliver on its promise. AI is really an analytical backbone that helps you mine your history better, your customers better, looks for activities for inefficiency. So it's using artificial intelligence to help you think differently and maybe look at it from a clear perspective. But a balanced scorecard is the way to align all functions and processes and then determine how AI can use that to add value and realign.
Incredible. Okay. Yeah, again, AI, because from my standpoint, it's like, well, AI can do all of this, but that's why I'm so interested in this conversation of where it stands. And so
that's a challenge. Everybody believes AI is the magic pill. Right? They're looking at technology and this artificial sort of knowledge that it's going to bring to be the magic pill. What Gene and I have learned through our careers, and we believe, is that technology is an enabler. But as Gene talked about a second ago, people, process, and technology, those are the three legs of the stool. One doesn't outweigh the other. All three need to be properly in harmony with each other. And if you think of a stool, one leg can't be stronger than the other leg, or else the weakest leg is the one that's going to break. So if one leg is stronger and longer than any other, it's going to put strain on the other two legs. You've got to keep people, process, and technology in balance. Balanced scorecard is a way to align the organization, to think that through, understand the strategy, and make sure that they're looking at performance metrics that ensure that they stay in harmony with one another.
Right. And it goes along with what we've been saying, because if you decentralize your supply chain into those basic processes, that's where the data is going to be, to Scott's point. So the early successes in AI are within a functional place that is basically one transaction or one series of transactions that behave like its own silo. The challenge is going to come as we go forward into multi-process or multifunctional activities, and the balanced scorecard gets us that way. That's where the big challenge is going to be for AI as well.
So we're going to show a graphic that helps put in perspective what a balanced scorecard is. So I'm going to stop here for a second. Okay, so those that are listening in today, we're showing a graphic. The graphic is a pyramid. Typically, you would associate it with a hierarchy of needs. So you have base level needs working its way up a pyramid to the highest level of needs. Once you satisfy the lowest level of needs, you work up to the highest level of needs. We start with strategic management system. So a balanced scorecard is based on a management structure, works its way up in the next tier to a cascading metric system that looks at metrics that can be cascaded throughout the business. Balanced scorecard rests on those two levels, which says, hey, one, I've got a strategy, I have a vision where I'm trying to go. The second says, well, I've harmonized on what those metrics are that help me understand how I deliver on that strategy. The balanced scorecard says, don't do it in a silo-based structure. Do it in an executive structure and make sure that you're looking across the business. Above the balanced scorecard comes the strategy map, which says, how are we going to get to our end objective, which then sits the strategy. Above that is the vision. Above that is the values of the business and what they prioritize. Above that, at the highest level, is the mission, the purpose of the organization. So at the hierarchy of needs, you start at the highest level with a mission, and you trickle that down within the business to get to how am I going to deliver that mission, and then how do I lay out metrics that help me align what I'm doing and what I'm measuring to what it is I want to deliver and what's critical for me to deliver. Gene, anything you'd like to add to that?
No, that's fine. That shows where balanced scorecard fits in the overall management process, and that's valuable to know.
Let me go back there for a second, Scott, if you can. So when you're showing this to individuals and clients or new clients, is this the way that you all think about it with eMate Consulting? Is there a different way that you all think about this in the way that you present this, or how do you all go about that?
What KPIs typically stay down in the cascading metrics, right? So most organizations that they've thought about a scorecard, they've thought about how do I get each functional area to deliver and how do I control expenses, manage productivity, and deliver maximum value at a functional area. What they haven't done is harmonize each of the functions into a strategic roadmap and then harmonize those metrics up to a balanced scorecard that says, how do I look across the organization to look for things that help me understand how the business is performing in a connected way? So an example of that from a supply chain standpoint is measuring on time and in full. On time and in full tells the supply chain where when they delivered an order with exactly what was ordered, and they delivered it to the customer when the customer expected it, and they get credit for either being exactly right or they get no credit at all, because from the customer's perspective, the customer only wants and cares about you getting them what they wanted when you promised to get it to them in the quantity that they ordered, that you handshook and said, I'm going to get you that when you want it. So that's a great metric from a supply chain standpoint of looking at a balanced scorecard metric for a supply chain, which then looks at, because that one metric not only looks at the distribution team's ability to pick accurately, but also finances team to get the invoice and manifesting correct, as well as the planning team's ability to have the right product at the right time to be able to facilitate that perfect order experience for a customer.
Right. So if it's late or if it's not in full, what's the root cause of that? That forces you to focus on a problem you're having somewhere in the supply chain that's creating a late delivery or not in full delivery. That's what's so powerful about that metric. And it's also customer oriented too, which is where a lot of the value comes from. So great example.
If you can remember sort of this pyramid to your question, Lane, if you look at the vision, which is your core purpose in the organization and the things that you value, and you then layer in your vision of how you're going to deliver on that mission and value structure, that plays to the strategy of the organization. Now you're bubbling up your vision of performance to the business to a strategic plane, and you stop focusing on individual functional silos to those things that your customer values, right? Your focus and the vision of this should be, how do I differentiate myself in the marketplace in the eyes of your customer, not in the eyes of yourself internally, which is where the cascading metrics and the strategic management structure gets to. That's internal, and how am I going to ensure that I'm delivering to what it is I committed to? You're elevating yourself to, what am I delivering to the market, which is a customer point of view or a consumer point of view, to how am I adding value in the marketplace, and how do I ensure I continue to be valuable from a strategic point of view in the marketplace.
Yeah, I wanted to ask that question. I know that most people, or maybe many people, would have that question when it comes to what you all do. You were going to go to another slide after this one, so I interrupted you. So here we go.
No, you're good. So as you look at across the business, there are 4 key areas, and that's what we're showing on the chart right now. What we're showing is a pie chart, which are the 4 key areas that the balanced scorecard should include. So it should include internal metrics, which is how efficient is the day-to-day operation; financial metrics, which is how is the operation impacting financial performance; it should have customer metrics, which is how are we impacting or pleasing our customer; and last but not least, it should be learning and growth metrics, which is what are we doing, how are we innovating, how are we driving value. All of those should be centered around your vision and strategy in the marketplace, and with different levels of energy and focus and metrics being put against each of those. 3 metrics have sort of a balanced view of how many metrics should be included in the balanced scorecard. Learning and growth, internal performance, and financial are all equally weighted in the pie chart. We believe, and we talk to our customers about, metrics that impact your customer: returns and the reason for returns, on time and in full, as we previously discussed, customer satisfaction scores, lifetime value, market share, things that represent an insight into your customers and where you are or are not reaching your vision and your strategy, should have a much heavier weight, near 50% weight, of the overall metrics which are used in the balanced scorecard. Gene, anything you'd like to add?
No, that was a brilliant move that the authors of this put together. There are categories of balanced metrics like these 4. And to Scott's point, look how important the customer one is, because we know that's where a lot of the value is going to be there for creation, for application. So you really need to give a lot of thought to customer value metrics, and not just 1 or 2, or not just revenue gained and so forth. So this really shows how you can break down the possible metrics for those you can really look at across processes. I spent years telling people that were doing high fives out of the warehouse when they shipped their goods 100% on time. They weren't even looking at when the customer received them. The customer doesn't give a damn when you ship it. They care about when they receive it. So it's turning around the thinking from internal metrics to what's on the customer's mind, for example. And the balanced scorecard really enables you to do that.
If you're not watching this right now, the slice of the pie, just from my standpoint, the customer obviously is about a half of it, and then you have little pizza slices of the other 3. So just a visual for the individuals that may be listening to this right now.
So the market is struggling with 3 key parameters today. One is higher labor costs. The other is inflation, which means higher material costs. And the last one is a variable consumer spend. If you look at the chart and think about it from a balanced scorecard perspective, labor costs are all met with your internal metrics, looking at productivities, looking at staffing levels, looking at, inventory levels, damages, cycle times, those sort of things. Inflation typically is dealt with your financial metrics, looking at your cost per unit procured, your cost per unit shipped, your cost per unit delivered. The reason why we believe that the customer should be a large part of the pie is the last component in what is happening in today's marketplace. The variable, or some people say fickle, nature of the current consumer behavior is being driven by their trade-offs of the discretionary funds they have, and they're balancing things that they need as basics and things that they are discretionary not spending on, which are luxury items. However, studies have shown that even in the luxury item category, when you offer items at the right price, people at times will sacrifice basics for the luxury items, but it requires those luxury items to hit that right price point to entice behavior. By understanding and focusing on, in a balanced scorecard way, the things that help drive consumer trade-offs, consumer behavior, behavior and performance will help a business be able to unlock what they need to do to be able to turn on that consumption pipe. That's an example where AI can become very helpful in the future. Looking at historically what reductions are needed in which categories of goods to turn on that consumption behavior, and using that to determine when and where they're going to use the trade-off between margin and volume, revenue, and just sort of throughput of units is going to be important in the future to be able to optimize the business, keep working capital available, and be driving the business to continue its productivity. Majority of your current metrics, your silo-based metrics, are in the internal and financial slices of the pie, right? That a third of the pie, that is where most people are looking. The other area where most organizations are lacking today in a balanced scorecard is looking at the learning and growth portion, which is probably, a quarter of the pie that we're looking at, is in the learning and growth sequence, which is, and this is where the current generation is really focused on. What's their productivity? How are they learning? How are they growing? How are they upskilling? What is the organization doing to invest in them? Why do they stick around? Why would they stay? Why did they leave? Those sort of things are incredibly important, particularly in the tight labor market and increasing labor costs. That learning and growth part of the pie is critical in a balanced scorecard to making sure that the turnover rate that you experience isn't too excessive, and the cost that you're having to incur from a labor cost and training perspective doesn't get out of control and doesn't become a larger portion of your expense structure. So each of these need to be in harmony, and the chart we're showing gives you a relative perspective of what we believe is the proper weighting of the factors and the rationale for that weighting.
Taking that back to the customer for a minute, the net score methodology is out there being used by a lot of companies right now. They get at not only the tangible metrics like on time in full, but the intangibles like loyalty and customer responsiveness and collaboration and those types of things. Those can be measured. We didn't used to think we could measure intangibles. You can measure that. And so that's another way of saying, how are we going to improve our customer value unless we understand our customers better than what dock we deliver the products to? So there's a lot of opportunity here when you start thinking balance, to Scott's point, and where that metric that matters really comes from. It's not just one event. It's driven by the internal metrics that create that event.
So the key is, and you've heard even from Starbucks recently saying they're going to streamline operations, reduce expenses in the hopes of increasing long-term business performance. Okay. How do you enhance long-term business performance? The only way you can do it is by understanding your customer expectations, trying to drive more loyalty, trying to drive people to come and buy more. Again, focus on the customer. That's how a balanced scorecard helps you break this mold where most organizations looking at just KPIs focus on expense reduction, operations improvement. They're focused on the wrong place, and they're wondering why they're not getting their return. It's because they're not focused on the customer and ensuring that the changes that they're making adds value.
If an organization is so far down the path of only working with KPIs, well, let me just ask you this question. If you have an opportunity to work with a client or a prospective client and they're so down the path of KPIs, that's the only way they grade their systems, that's the only way they grow, or that's the only way they talk internally. What do you say about the balanced scorecard? What would you say about how you need to switch over to that process?
So the KPIs are good for management within a function. We would tell them they need to elevate and make sure they know what the strategy is of the business, what the differentiating factors are, and how the business needs to function to be able to deliver on that promise. That will naturally elevate the balanced scorecard elements that the team needs to look at, here's what you're really trying to do. So I'm going to give you a little different twist. It's really a change management tool. It's a change management enabler to transition the business from thinking not only about their own purse, their own wallet, their own performance, their own bonus, to the overall sustainability of the organization as a whole, and ensuring that they're partnering with their processes before their function and after their function to deliver optimal performance for the business in whole. So it's a change management enabler to changing the culture of the business, to thinking as a business owner, thinking end to end, versus as a functional owner, thinking only within the silos of their organization.
What does that do when you can change the way of thinking? So when you have it in a silo approach versus vision and mission, and what does that do to the thinking of the business?
So a lot of organizations have gone through what they call business process redesign. This will allow that to naturally occur. They'll start to recognize that, hey, I'm dropping the ball and I'm causing pain to somebody else. They don't have the information I have, and I might as well just get it done while I'm there, right? They'll start to unlock opportunities for efficiency and better ways to handle a customer, better ways to add value, better ways to eliminate costs, to eliminate functions and roles. They'll find streamlining naturally versus it being forced by an executive.
Yeah, the other key to this is the performance measures management uses to evaluate their people. If you reward people on KPIs that are missing the point, woe is you. If you change your performance measures to line up with what you want in the balanced scorecard, you'll typically get better results and more insight into value. So it's all part of change, as Scott said, but you've got to think about how you measure your people at the same time.
So a balanced scorecard looks fundamentally differently. So with that, I'm going to stop for a minute. I'm going to show you guys this. Share my screen again. Balanced scorecard looks fundamentally differently from a KPI scorecard. The idea here is you're focused on cross-functional metrics that help the business understand their ability to meet their strategy and their promise to their customers. It should be visual, it should be easy to read, and it should give feedback on how those metrics are either being met or not met. So it's not a matter of, which I see even in my consulting today, where folks are putting out KPIs where they're not giving any declarative back of, am I on track? Am I off track? Is this performance good? Is it bad? Balanced scorecard should use different ways to display data, and it should give an indication of whether the performance is reaching the expectation or is behind the expectation. And if it's not reaching what it should be reaching, a balanced scorecard should automatically kick into the area owner where it's not being met, coming up with an action plan, a corrective action plan to ensure that that function gets back on track and delivers to the expectation. So it's not just a matter of collecting numbers and showing numbers and metrics. It's a way to put those numbers and metrics in perspective and should facilitate proactively the owner of that function stepping up to get an action plan to talk about what corrective actions will take place to be able to get it back on track.
Leaders get tired of looking at numbers on a screen. So getting some pictures like this are so important to encourage people who are leading, whether it's a process or a function or something true to value, get them to look at pictures like this that are images that really mean something. So it's very key how you present a balanced scorecard and not the same old control towers with just numbers on top of something else. So it's quite revolutionary in our
So
view.
to those people that are listening, let me describe what it is we're showing on the visual. We're showing on the top metrics that most people are used to seeing, revenue numbers or margin numbers or something that tells top side of the business how you're performing, and it should be actual versus target. So there's always a comparative. And to the right of that, it gives a red, yellow, green saying we're reaching our target or we're not. Below that are operational parameters, which are radial dials, which have dark green, light green, yellow, and red. And there's a needle that shows where the performance is in each one of the key areas that are highlighted where performance is being tracked. Below that, typically you're going to have some graphics that shows, outbound volume or demand or something that you need to have some kind of graphic. And you should always have a plan versus actual perspective. And then on the right side, you're showing some financial metrics, either your cost per unit, your order to cash cycle. You're doing things that show how are we converting our orders into actual financial dollars, right? So it's a visual way of showing whatever those balanced scorecard metrics are in a way that's easy to read, using red, yellow, green, red being it's off track and needs to be corrective action immediately. Yellow meaning you're off track, but corrective action should be done, but not done too aggressively. Light green says I'm meeting my goal, but not as well as I should. And dark green says, yeah, I'm fine. Everything's in harmony and I can leave it alone and let it run. So that's what we're showing on the graphic that you're not able to see.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's give the listeners a little bit of, and from my standpoint, from the outsider looking in, obviously those are very easy to read at first glance, and it makes it very simple to do so. It's easy to tell. I'll put it that way when you're looking at something like this. So with the balanced scorecard, Gene, I think I interrupted you. So anything to add there?
Just that I want to make sure it's clear. The time frame on that could be anywhere from days to weeks to months to years. I mean, that's the flexibility of a balanced scorecard. Once you figure out how to create the data for the balance, what time you show it on is critical. There's something called expected that always comes up. We have a plan, we're off plan, so what is our new expectation? And then discuss what's the actual. So you can adjust it like that over time and make it useful, not just once every month or once every 3 months. It's got real-time use.
So why would you do it, right? Because the last two slides I have talk about the labor market. Are we in an unprecedented times or are we not? We can show that or we can't show it. The other thing I was going to bring up is, their job cut announcements, Amazon, Oracle, Nike, UPS. So we're not in a period that's abnormal. It's not an AI thing. I mean, AI, of course, everybody's hoping the magic pill will show up, but why do a balanced scorecard? I think it's the unlock to help a business change its management structure so that it can proactively manage versus having to take a reactionary big hit by not having the visibility and the proactive way to work together to just do it naturally.
Okay, so we've talked a lot in this episode. You have shared some incredible slides, and if you're not watching this, make sure you go back and watch it. But ultimately, why the balanced scorecard? Walk us through as we kind of tail in on the end of this episode.
Yeah, I think everybody is listening to the news and dealing in today's environment has heard about all the job cuts that major organizations are going through, right? Of course, Microsoft with Xbox is the latest news. Starbucks and their job cuts, Amazon, Oracle, Nike, UPS. We all hear about the job cuts. The balanced scorecard is a way to ensure that the organization is proactively and consistently looking across the business to make proactive adjustments to ensure they deliver on the performance that's needed to sustain the business and to drive growth. So if you're only doing a KPI or siloed metric-based process, you're suboptimizing the overall performance of the business. You're optimizing your function, but that may not pull through the overall performance of the business. What happens is your executive team's looking at the top side performance of the business. They make a determination of, I'm not delivering to my commitment to the street. Guys, we need to make a reduction. We need to take out X number of heads so we can deliver on what we agreed we were going to deliver on. The teams that are aggressively managing their costs and their expenses also get hit when that happens. So the idea that you're protected because you're managing your own function effectively is a misnomer. Because if your organization isn't delivering on the expectation to the street or its shareholders, all teams will be affected to some level. And so the only way you can ensure that that doesn't hit you and you're not caught up in this big wave of reduction is to put in place a balanced scorecard that looks end to end consistently and ensures that all areas of the business are delivering on the promise.
Yeah, labor is a good one to pilot test because it's current, to Scott's point, and you can measure productivity that way and not just the basic things we had before. Someone said the largest cost in a warehouse is labor. I'm not sure that's true anymore, but it certainly needs to be evaluated for each company. And the other thing you could look at for a pilot is all the disruptions that continue to happen in lead time. I mean, where is that lead time and how it's affecting our overall network is rarely used in a metric. It's usually one group does this analysis, throws it over the wall to the other, and so forth. So some metrics around lead time that might be really helpful on your business and also your value. So things like this can be started just to see how difficult it's going to be for your team to do a balance of a certain process or function.
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion in the marketplace related to labor. Everybody seems to focus on it, given sort of the tight labor market, the increasing expectation of labor rates, those sort of things. But if we put it in perspective, the level of layoffs is not abnormal to what we've experienced here in recent years. With that, I'm going to stop because I'm going to share. So the graphic that we're showing was from Washington Post here in recent weeks. Looking at the graph on the left on this page shows the layoffs by year. It's basically looking by month through the year. It's showing from 2016 to 2020. We were somewhere around on an average monthly layoff rate, about 2 million folks are being laid off. And then, of course, we had the pandemic, which spiked to 8 million folks. And then we had a little more layoffs in 2021. And then we leveled out a little bit, and we're back to around 1.75 million per month here in 2026. So we're back to where we were historically at about 1.75 million folks being laid off each month. So we're not in an abnormal time. I mean, we hear about it and the news talks about the large number of layoffs. And the thing that folks are looking for, they're trying to attribute it to AI. Folks are looking for highly specialized and trained people. They're looking for the people they hire to be highly productive, right? And they're evaluating labor critically given the increasing, cost of labor. So folks are expecting a higher salary, and that's causing labor to be under critical review. The second slide I'm showing shows the layoff rate versus the hire rate. Now, what is occurring here in 2026, which is a little abnormal, is that the layoff rate is higher in proportionality compared to the hire rate. So what's happening is those that are being laid off aren't being hired as quickly as they had historically. That is the concerning trend, right? Well, we want to see if folks are available, that they get picked up by another industry or another organization. The part that the people are feeling is that they're not being picked up as quickly. And we probably can attribute some of that to AI. Some of that you can attribute to folks that are retiring. So we've got a large part of the population that is timing out and that is aging into retirement. And we've got, some folks that are selectively not interested in working, right? So you always hear about the part of the population is selected to opt out and is not looking for employment. The key part is, while AI is putting pressure on some of this, that is not the cause. So a lot of the things we've experienced in the past, we were experiencing today at a similar level. So we shouldn't look at this as an abnormal time. This is a normal time. There are pressures that are out there. Inflation is the big one that people are dealing with now. That's putting pressure on the supply chain because folks are looking for places they can go to buy their goods at a cheaper rate. That's being countered by the tariff situation and other pressures that are out there that could impact the cost of fuel for vessels and the long transit times, those sort of things. But the labor rate part of it is something that is still there and hasn't really changed much from what it has been historically. The balanced scorecard helps you put all these in perspective. So instead of only focusing on labor, it helps you to focus on the other areas of the business that are important to you driving to your vision. That's why you need a balanced scorecard. Labor productivity is only one aspect of it. There's more to it than that. Your ability to meet your requirements, your expectation order to receipt is important. What you built in on that delivery cost is important. Your order to cash cycle is important. How much inventory you're carrying and why you're carrying it, what your distribution looks like is important, right? A balanced scorecard should take into account all the elements that are needed for you to hit not only your consumer metrics, but your financial metrics, so that you can deliver on that promise, keeping all parameters in perspective and looking for ways to find efficiency in all areas of the business. So when we talk about value creation, again, value is not just financial. Value has many different ways to define it, and the organization needs to define, based on what its customer sees as value, how they're going to deliver on that value proposition.
That's so good. Gene, anything to add there as well on the balance scorecard?
That's valuable principles right there. And I think it's not any easier now that, in fact, people that are laying off because they think AI was going to substitute, some of them are hiring back. So I think, and again, I think Scott touched on this, but you can use a balanced scorecard to decide what you really need in the business and where they should be. And there is a talent shortage out there, and it's going to rear its ugly head if the economy gets better, as some predict. And that's the other thing you're choosing. You need to think about how the economy is going to look in 6 months and decide on your labor plan that way. It's a tricky business, but unless you know through a balanced scorecard what you're dealing with, it's hard to make judgment calls on these kind of things.
Well, if anyone that's listening to this, Scott or Gene, if they are interested in learning more about what it would look like with working with you all and getting a balanced scorecard or better understanding a balanced scorecard, is that what it looks like? I mean, does that eMake Consulting, do you guys walk through that? What's the typical engagement look like?
Again, everything we do starts with understanding the strategy. So we've got to understand what the organization believes is their value proposition, not from their perspective, from their customer or consumer's perspective. That's a big differentiator. A lot of folks look at their value proposition and their strategy from an internal view of what they think makes them unique to the market, as opposed to listening to their customers and listening to how they're perceived in the marketplace. So we start with doing an understanding of voice of the customer, review. We try to understand from the executive team how aligned or misaligned they are. That helps to then facilitate an alignment session, if you will. And then you come up with what are the things that have to be effectively managed to deliver on the financial performance of the business, as well as the consumer experience part of the business, to be able to not just sustain the business, but to drive growth and take additional market share. So it's a process of alignment, and it's a process of recognizing what is really critical, as opposed to going in each function saying, okay, this function is managed by X or Y. You got to get above that. It's got to be connected. You got to find the things that connects the business together to ensure it's going to be profitable.
Yeah, and we're comfortable working top down, bottoms up, middle down. We've had experience on all the levels. And so this enables us to look at a business from a broad point of view and then drill down to what's important.
Yeah, recognize, Lane, to your question, the balanced scorecard, again, is a change management enabler. It naturally causes the business to think differently about their business than they have for the past, since they've been running in their business. Everybody has always thought about KPIs, silo-based. I got to be, deliver on certain metrics. The balanced scorecard forces you to get above that and say, well, if I was a business owner, what it is I want my business to do. So it takes the team and it gets them to talk. It gets them to discuss their pain points, and it gets them to align on what's really the vision. What are we trying to do, and how do we think differently, work differently, act differently as a change agent and a change enabler to change the way the business thinks and works.
We just one quick point. We had a team once count the number of KPIs that it exists. It was over 600. So you see how that's impractical. So picking the right ones, especially for our balanced scorecard, as we call it, the critical few, makes a big difference. So that's a big important decision has to be made as well.
Yeah. Wow. Well, we've talked about inventory management, a couple episodes there, now the balanced scorecard. And in the show notes, obviously, there will be clicks and links if you want to go follow Scott and Gene on LinkedIn. If you want to get connected and learn more about eMate Consulting, you'll be able to do that. And so with that, if you guys are listening to this episode, make sure to go give the guys 5-star rating and a 5-star review. If you're over on YouTube, share this. If there's anybody within your network that you feel like this would add value to, or if you want to send this to someone in management and say, hey, you need to listen to this, so we need to make sure you do the balanced scorecard, make sure you go and do that as well. And so until next time, thanks so much for listening to another episode of the Value Creation Nation, and we will see you on the next episode.